Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure and an honor to participate in the AMPS conference, a focus on pedagogy, a space that invites us to reflect on contemporary teaching in a time of change. We would like to express our gratitude to AMP, the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, and the academic organizers of this event for creating this international forum for dialogue, reflection, and exchange around teaching, learning, and pedagogical innovation. Authored by PhD Sergio Zabala-Vargas of the Corporación Universitaria Minuto de Dios, Colombia, and myself, Master Maria Jaimes-Quintanilla, of the Corporación Unificada Nacional de Educación Superior, Colombia. We are pleased to present this proposal. The title of our presentation is Project-Based Learning as an Emerging Pedagogy for Enhancing Organizational Development and Talent Management Education. The central idea of this study is to explore how project-based learning can help bridge the gap between human resource theory and complex organizational realities. In other words, we are interested in understanding how students can move from knowing concepts to applying them in meaningful organizational contexts. The starting point of this study is a common challenge in higher education programs related to management, organizational development, and human talent. Many students learn concepts such as recruitment, selection, performance evaluation, organizational climate, leadership, and employee engagement through traditional pedagogical approaches. These approaches usually include lectures, readings, isolated exercises, or conceptual exams. Although these strategies are valuable, they are not always enough to prepare students for the complexity of organizational practice. In real organizations, human talent management is not a linear process. It involves uncertainty, people, emotions, culture, power relations, data, ethical decisions, and strategic priorities. A student may know the definition of organizational climate, but this does not necessarily mean that the student can diagnose a real workplace situation, interpret evidence, and design a coherent intervention. Therefore, the problem addressed in this study is the gap between knowing human resource management concepts and being able to use them to solve complex organizational problems. This study is supported by three conceptual pillars. The first pillar is project-based learning. Authors such as Bell and Kokotsaki describe PBL as an active learning approach in which students work on complex, meaningful, and contextualized problems. In this approach, students are not passive receivers of information. They become active participants who investigate, discuss, design, create, and communicate solutions. The second pillar is talent management education. This area requires students to understand organizational systems, ethical interventions, workforce planning, performance processes, leadership dynamics, and organizational culture. Talent management is not only administrative, it is strategic and deeply human. The third pillar is Keller's ARCS motivational model, based on attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. This model helps explain why students become more motivated when learning experiences are interesting, professionally relevant, achievable, and meaningful. At the center of these three pillars is the idea of the student as an emerging professional who learns by solving organizational problems. The main objective of the study was to design, implement, and evaluate a project-based learning strategy to strengthen practical competencies, critical thinking, collaboration, and confidence in the use of human resource management tools. The guiding question was, how does project-based learning contribute to perceived autonomy and the integration of theoretical and practical human resource knowledge? We also asked whether students increased their confidence in applying specific talent management tools and whether they demonstrated measurable competencies in problem analysis and intervention design. The study was not only interested in whether students liked the strategy, it also aimed to understand whether PBL helped them think and act more like professionals in organizational development and talent management. This is important because human talent education should not be limited to memorizing categories. It should prepare students to diagnose, interpret, decide, communicate, and intervene in complex organizational realities. The pedagogical intervention was implemented with 120 higher education students enrolled in business and management programs. The students were between 20 and 46 years old and included both working professionals and full-time students. The experience was developed in a virtual and blended higher education context. Students used learning management systems, virtual boards, collaborative data tools, shared documents, and synchronous and asynchronous work sessions. The students were organized into multidisciplinary teams of 4 to 5 members. These teams were intentionally formed to encourage diverse perspectives and to resemble, at least partially, the dynamics of real human resource departments. The research design was educational and applied in nature. Data were collected through competency rubrics, surveys adapted from motivational frameworks, and final project portfolios. These instruments made it possible to evaluate both the learning process and the quality of the organizational intervention proposed by each team. The strategy was organized into 8 learning units. The first 4 units focused on understanding the organizational problem and collecting evidence. In the first unit, students worked on context mapping. They explored the organization or simulated case, identified relevant stakeholders, and recognized strategic challenges. In the second unit, they defined the problem. Each team selected a human talent challenge related to recruitment, performance evaluation, organizational climate, training, leadership, or employee engagement. In the third unit, students built a diagnostic framework. They connected theoretical concepts with indicators and analytical categories. This helped them move from a general perception of the problem to a more structured interpretation. In the fourth unit, students collected evidence. Depending on the case, they used surveys, interviews, document review, or simulated organizational data. This stage was fundamental because it encouraged evidence-based reasoning rather than intuitive decision-making. The second part of the learning path focused on designing, improving, and presenting the intervention. In the fifth unit, students designed the intervention. They proposed actions aligned with the diagnosis, objectives, expected results, and implementation strategy. In the sixth unit, students participated in a feedback cycle. They received comments from peers and instructors, which allowed them to improve the coherence, feasibility, and professional quality of their proposals. In the seventh unit, the teams worked on simulation and evaluation. They explored possible implementation stages, indicators, risks, and expected organizational impact. Finally, in the eighth unit, students presented their final report and intervention proposal. This included the diagnosis, the proposed strategy, implementation plan, indicators, and reflective conclusions. This sequence was important because it provided scaffolding. Students did not face the full complexity of the project at once. They advanced progressively, with guidance, feedback, and opportunities for improvement. The results show relevant growth in students' professional competencies and confidence. Approximately 85% of participants reached high or very high levels in problem analysis and strategic thinking. This means that most students were able to identify specific organizational symptoms, interpret causes, and propose coherent solutions. Additionally, 78% of participants reported increased confidence in applying human resource management tools. These tools included job analysis, climate surveys, performance indicators, training needs analysis, and basic organizational diagnosis instruments. This finding is significant because confidence is not a minor issue in applied education. Students need to believe that they can use what they learn in professional contexts. In this case, project-based learning helped them move from conceptual understanding to applied professional action. The key insight is that the initial hesitation students experienced with HR instruments was reduced through a staged and feedback-rich learning process. The second group of results is related to engagement, autonomy, and the connection between theory and practice. The experience obtained high levels of satisfaction and perceived learning value. 88% of participants expressed a positive evaluation of the learning experience. In addition, 87% agreed that the strategy helped them connect theory with practical organizational challenges. This is especially important because one of the main problems in talent management education is that students often see theory as abstract or disconnected from real work. Also, 82% reported high or very high autonomy in the learning process. Students did not simply follow instructions, they had to make decisions, organize information, distribute tasks, defend arguments, and improve their proposals. In this sense, theory became a lens to interpret organizational realities. Students realized that concepts such as performance management, organizational climate, and engagement are not isolated definitions. They are tools for understanding complex human systems. Collaboration was one of the most important analytical findings of the study. The results suggest that effective collaboration was positively associated with relevance, attention, and satisfaction. In practical terms, when students worked together effectively, they perceived the project as more meaningful, more engaging, and more rewarding. This is highly coherent with the nature of human resource management. HR professionals rarely work in isolation. They interact with managers, employees, teams, external consultants, and institutional stakeholders. Therefore, collaboration in the classroom is not only a pedagogical strategy, it is also a simulation of professional practice and organizational life. The analysis suggests that collaborative work allowed students to compare perspectives, distribute responsibilities, challenge assumptions, and refine their intervention proposals. It also created opportunities for peer learning, where students could recognize alternative interpretations of the same organizational problem and improve their arguments through dialogue. In addition, collaboration helped students understand that organizational problems do not usually have a single correct answer. Different members of the team contributed different viewpoints about leadership, communication, performance, climate, and employee motivation. This diversity enriched the quality of the proposed interventions and encouraged students to support their decisions with evidence rather than personal opinion. However, collaboration must be intentionally designed. It is not enough to tell students to work in teams. Teachers must provide roles, milestones, expectations, feedback spaces, and accountability mechanisms. This helps reduce passive participation, promotes shared responsibility, and allows students to experience teamwork as a structured professional competency. In this study, collaboration worked as an engine of motivation because students felt that their work had social, academic, and professional value. It also helped them experience the type of collective decision-making that is expected in real organizational development and human talent management contexts. The experience also showed both successes and challenges. One of the main successes was systemic understanding. Students began to recognize that human resource practices are interconnected. Recruitment, training, performance evaluation, leadership, and organizational climate are not separate issues. They are part of the same organizational system. Another success was professional argumentation. Students moved from informal opinions to evidence-based intervention designs. They had to justify their decisions using data, theory, and organizational criteria. A third success was reflective identity. Several students began to see themselves as capable HR practitioners, not only as learners completing an academic task. However, challenges also appeared. One challenge was data literacy. Translating qualitative findings into meaningful HR indicators was not always easy. Another challenge was team dynamics. Unequal participation and coordination difficulties sometimes reproduced real workplace tensions. For this reason, future implementations should include stronger training in HR analytics and clearer mechanisms for individual accountability within teams. Based on the experience, the study proposes a pedagogical model for applied human resource education. The model begins with a contextualized organizational challenge. Students need a problem that is meaningful, complex, and connected with professional practice. The second stage is diagnosis. Students analyze the situation using concepts and tools from organizational development and talent management. The third stage is evidence collection. Students gather or interpret information that supports their understanding of the problem. The fourth stage is intervention design. Students propose actions, indicators, and implementation strategies. The fifth stage is simulation and evaluation. Students examine feasibility, risks, expected outcomes, and possible limitations. The sixth stage is reflection. Students analyze what they learned, what decisions they made, and how they can transfer the experience to future professional contexts. This model is cyclical and includes continuous feedback as a transversal component. There are 3 key takeaways for higher education. First, scaffolding is essential. Authenticity and autonomy are valuable, but they must be paired with rubrics, milestones, clear feedback, and structured guidance. Without scaffolding, complex projects can become confusing or unproductive. Second, collaboration simulates professional reality. Teamwork in the classroom mirrors the negotiation, coordination, and diverse perspectives required in modern human resource departments. Third, theory becomes a tool. Project-based learning transforms abstract academic concepts into practical diagnostic lenses, evaluative criteria, and instruments for organizational action. The central conclusion is that PBL allows students to bridge the gap between knowing and doing. It helps them understand that organizational development and talent management are not only fields of study, but fields of intervention. Therefore, project-based learning can contribute to a more active, applied, and competency-based model of higher education. This study is supported by several key academic references. Bell contributes to understanding project-based learning as a strategy for developing 21st-century skills. Keller's ARCS model helps explain the motivational dimensions of attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. Shine provides a fundamental perspective on organizational culture and leadership. Armstrong and Taylor support the conceptual basis of human resource management practice. Ulrich and colleagues contribute to the strategic understanding of HR competencies. Finally, previous work by Zabala-Vargas and collaborators supports the use of motivational and technology-mediated strategies in higher education. To conclude, this study shows that project-based learning is a valuable emerging pedagogy for organizational development and talent management education. It strengthens practical competencies, critical thinking, confidence, collaboration, and theory-practice integration. We would like to thank AMPS and the organizers of Madrid, a Focus on Pedagogy, for the opportunity to share this work in such a meaningful academic space. We also thank CUN and Uniminuto for supporting research, pedagogical innovation, and international academic dialogue. Thank you very much for your attention.